We want to move out and break the circle of poverty for our children, and education is my biggest tool to be able to do that.
Hello, my name is Pranav Kothari. I work in educational initiatives. Over the last 7 years, I've had direct experience of working in assessments, in technology-based personalized learning solutions, and a variety of interactions with senior government officials to improve learning outcomes at scale. I'm so excited to have Prachi Windlass join me on this talk today. She's a director at the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. MSDF is working to transform the lives of children and their families living in urban poverty. It's a really unique foundation that has in its portfolio some of the most respected NGOs, some of the dynamic startups working in education, and working with governments on a very large scale to do systemic transformation. MSDF has historically pushed for data and assessment solutions that allow to make an informed decision on where should the next investments be made. It has found unique ways to come up with new financing structures that would amplify the impact that it has made till date into the future, where a lot of this work would reach millions of children across India and the world. Thank you so much for coming, Prachi. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Pranav, for having me over.
So Prachi, you're working with governments on one end of the spectrum and young dynamic startups trying to solve problems in education on the other end of the spectrum. What is MSDF's investment strategy? What is the theory of change that you're employing?
So Pranav, we are trying to leverage both the best of the both, right? So our strategy is that with the government, which provides immense scale, which provides a lot of resources and the best of resources when it comes to teaching infrastructure, when it comes to the schools themselves or the training infrastructures, etc. That's really the environment our children should get. So the scale of our work will come from improving our public education system, but the innovation, on the other hand, the innovation in what technologies can be used in education, what will be the best-in-class teaching pedagogies, that innovation is coming from our startup portfolio. And the startup portfolio could be both. The startup portfolio could be our startups, which are for-profit companies, and they could also be not-for-profits. And we've seamlessly worked with both for a very long time now, and we are very comfortable with all three coexisting in our portfolio. So in some sense, our strategy is that a lot of our children are going to government schools. We have to impact and improve learning outcomes for them. Let's do it at scale, and let's do it by improving what already exists, which is our government, which is our public education system. But make sure we are always at the cutting edge of what needs to go in to improve them, and that's coming from the startups. And we had never thought that these two will converge. So we had never thought that this pot of constant innovation and newer organizations and newer companies coming into our portfolio, this has an end in itself. Innovation is an end in itself. Them improving the learning outcomes of whatever is their influence, reach, and impact is an objective in itself. But interestingly, what we are also now seeing is that the two are converging. Many of the companies and NGOs that we have worked in the past are the ones who are now working with our state governments as well, as they are now looking at more and newer solutions to improve the learning outcomes of students.
So Prachi, why this romance with scale, right? Because there are a lot of things that we still need to fix before, we still need to understand before we are all trying to scale solutions that may not have had the efficacy proven yet, that may not have had a theory of change reliant on high quality individuals to execute on it. So why are you so pushing on scale and working with the governments first?
So we are pushing on the scale, Pranav, very responsibly. We have been, in our entire work, been extremely responsible about measuring impact, proving impact, impact with attribution. So, and we've partnered with you and with EI and many other top assessment agencies in India to make sure that that is in place. And the scale strategy that we are following is not just taking those examples and saying, okay, now that this has proven impact, it can or it needs to go to scale. Because in government, our strategy has been very different. Our strategy has been a combination of administrative and academic reforms. If you would have just had a scale strategy in place to say this works, now let's scale it in the government. We've tried that also and failed with that. That won't have worked because there are some fundamental administrative inefficiencies with which no interventions can scale, no matter whether they have the history of impact or not. They just can't scale in that kind of an administrative setup. So our work with the government has been very different. Our work with the government has been, okay, let's also do the hard work of fixing the administrative issues in the system. And that's parallel. So it is not it's not a sequential strategy, it's a parallel strategy that let's also prepare the system to become better governed. Let's prepare the system to be run by data. Let's prepare the system to start holding itself accountable for children's learning levels. And this is what I'm calling the administrative reform, which is preparing the system to actually scale interventions. And that's a parallel strategy which is working. Now coming back to your question on are they proven enough? Are they ready? Are the organizations ready? There are many aspects to scaling, right? And I think the readiness is coming not from these organizations which have to scale with the government, but from government getting ready to scale high quality interventions and become not just self-governing, but self-improving for future as well. And a lot of these interventions only those interventions have actually come into the mix who have a track record of outcomes and attribution of outcomes to those interventions. So the answer is not perfect. For sure it is not perfect. If you'll ask me if have all of them gone through an RCT, no, they've not gone through an RCT. But but we know for sure through our third-party assessments, through what we are measuring in schools every day, that they are improving outcomes, and they're not incrementally improving the outcomes, they're actually dramatically improving the outcomes of students.
MSDF has been the longest supporter of assessments. From the very early onset, MSDF has believed in student assessments, believed in measuring impact, validating that. Yeah. Can you describe the genesis of that? So why did you so strongly believe in it from almost a decade ago when this wasn't the common parlance that it is today?
Yeah. I think we are so dogmatic almost about assessments because none of us comes from a background in education. So the history in the foundation is when we started, and none of us was an educationist. No one understood education. We had to put some metrics around it to see whether or not the work we are supporting is actually creating the impact that we want. And I mean, honestly, that's the genesis of our work. But it's the bedrock of our work. Till date, it continues that whatever we are funding, supporting, and scaling, it has to prove impact at all of those levels. And we've been very fortunate to have partners like you, partners like Grey Matters India, and others to have been there, all along that journey. But if you were to ask me, have we done enough over there? That's one part of the ecosystem, or that's one part of the entire development dialogue in education in India, which is still an underdeveloped area. Do we have enough data available with us, and not just data, do we have enough insights available with us which can inform not just existing work but generation of work that has to yet to come? We definitely don't. Do we have these available publicly? Definitely not. Are newer organizations starting off at a higher point in terms of creating their own repository of insights? We don't. And so this is a very underdeveloped area of work altogether. And till that's the situation, there is a role for us to play in data and in assessments. And but the thing which is changing is that now, at least with folks like us, with you and others, there is at least that, there's that body of work of the last 10, 15, 20 years, whatever you choose to call it, where good and very rich information is sitting. Our work with you on the common misconceptions, which describes through millions of children which you have now assessed, that these in these grades and in these subjects, these are the hard spots of children, is something just very basic, right? Every education company should have that data and say, okay, before I go anywhere else, this base I have to cover.
Right.
And so what gives, yes, I'm saying from at one hand that this is the most underdeveloped area of the education ecosystem today, and therefore, we have a long way to go, you have a long way to go. But at the same time, we have together in the past few years created enough IP and work products which we should now be leveraging even more. We literally started from ground zero on this one.
It's great to hear that a lot of the work that you have sponsored, commissioned, been active partners is going to be in the public domain, that it's going to help everyone, not just people who were grants from you or got investments from you, but this, for example, this list of the top misconceptions for every grade subject combination is going to be a great starting point for a lot of implementation agencies or even solutions providers to not sort of try to make a solution in a black box, but almost have a menu of things that they need to resolve before they go ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the purpose of it. And misconceptions is one example and that we could leverage immensely in all of our collective work going forward. But the simplicity of these metrics and the standardization of these metrics, which has already brought about a huge change in the ecosystem altogether, right? There is a sifting now which is possible to say, okay, these are the organizations which can provide me the outcome that I'm looking for and at this cost. And there is this track record or these outcomes which they've been rigorously measured through for the past. And there are others which are still in the development phase. So at least that sifting is now possible through what we've been able to do in the past.
Can you give some examples of this sifting? What does it really mean? Sitting from where you are, what do you mean now that you have organizations that have gotten some track record, some that are in development? Is this based only on assessments? Is this based on other things? If you can just sort of give some examples of this, that'd be great.
Sure. So we have from the very beginning measured the impact of all of these organizations through common assessments which can be used across organizations irrespective of the nature of the intervention, the geography of the intervention, as well as the nature of the organization. So if there is something being funded by Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, it would go through a common assessment administered by a third party.
So whether it's headmaster leadership training in remote parts of Rajasthan, or it's in classroom intervention in Orissa, or it's giving supplementary learning materials, they all take the same student learning assessment.
Absolutely.
And from a portfolio perspective, you're able to see where they started out, where they ended, and what was the impact on student learning outcomes.
Absolutely, net of control.
Right.
So we know where they started, where they ended, and we also know if these children were not given any intervention altogether, what the impact on their learning outcomes would have been. So this data is available for multiple years on these organizations. We have the data on their longitudinal performance as well. And we also have the data on their cost structures and and whatever you choose to call the nature of the intervention. Like you said, the headmaster training is a much more complex intervention possibly than a very scripted remedial program. The costs might be very different, but also the intervention model or the operational model might be very different. So what we have been able to do in our portfolio is to bucket interventions in these categories, apply these common assessments to them, and then be able to put a frame around it that at this cost for this period of time with this kind of an operational model, really what is the ROI, what is the return on my investment, and what is it that I'm going to get. And once we were able to move away from just a portfolio of companies to these buckets, to these standardized metrics, then we were able to, that's actually where the non-linear part of our growth journey actually started. That's when we were able to work with the government actually and say that, okay, Rajasthan government, you're ready to launch pedagogic interventions at scale for the entire state. Here is Bodh Shiksha Samiti, which has worked in your school system for several years, and this is their track record, and these are their outcomes. We were able to launch more recently the Development Impact Bond, which has become possible only because of this kind of data being available in these organizations, right? Just imagine, the risk investor over there. He's actually the risk investors are actually taking a bet on these organizations, and they're saying that, which organizations will give me that guaranteed return in their outcomes, and I have to be sure that they will be able to deliver on that. So to be able to simply provide not just the historical data, but also to be able to provide it in buckets, because they all come with a different cost per child as well, is what is making such ecosystem interventions actually possible, which is where scale starts coming into picture, because this is not something that we can do alone, but this is something that we have to do collaboratively with many other funders as well as organizations which will be able to do that.
What I'm hearing is, there's a lot of power and benefit in having a rich data set that spans multiple years and multiple organizations' theories of change, right? So what I heard is the longitudinal part is important, because some interventions may not show impact in the first or the second year, but would sort of make up and catch up in the fourth or fifth year, like the headmaster leadership training piece, right? But there are other organizations that are showing impact early on, but are much more expensive on a cost per child basis. So you almost have this matrix, which is like, what learning growth would happen, when it would happen, and how much would it cost per child. To then sort of go to the government and saying, all of this has been done in very similar settings. And when we take it to scale in your state, this is what you can expect. And even having those benchmarks to be able to then say, this is what was done at small scale, at mid scale, at large scale, and how do we calibrate for all of that.
Absolutely.
Nice. And you're saying this is a good starting point for the Development Impact Bond, because now you already have a rich data set, which allows you to, convince the risk investor to say, hey, this is, baseline data, and this is how you can price the premiums and the things for that. So tell us more about this Development Impact Bond. Why did you start this? What was the genesis of this? How do you see this going into the future?
It's very, very interesting for us. It's new, and new is always exciting, but it serves two very important goals that we always set for ourselves. One goal is that there has to be, linkage to performance in this sector. We talk a lot about performance, but we neither incentivize performance nor do we actually measure performance, right? So there has to be linkage with performance. There has to be, we have to be able to scale the work which is good, and the work which is, which is going to benefit our children. And we have to do it in collaboration. So if something is working, it is showing the results, we need to scale it, but then to scale you need more resources. So we should be able to collaborate much more. So these three objectives, used to be a quest for MSDF almost, to say, okay, how do we actually get others as excited about our work as we do, but how do we continue with the rigor that we bring in terms of focus on learning outcomes. And so all of those three objectives, if you come to think of it, get met very well in the DIB. There are the organizations which are participating in the DIB on the service providers side are saying that yes, if I participate in this program, I will be able to deliver this outcome for you. And there are two entities at either end of the DIB. There are risk investors who are saying that yes, I believe that these organizations at this cost structure in this time period will be able to do that. And there are outcome funders like us who are saying that yes, if in fact that is true, I would want to incentivize that achievement of the outcome. So it's a very neat structure to do it at scale and to do it collaboratively.
Are there any downsides to this structure? What is the biggest counter argument against DIB?
Many, Pranav. I mean, you said some of them, right? That there are. It's not been tested enough. Nothing can be ever tested enough. There are, we've not just tested this enough in terms of organizations. There is little to lose for the organizations which are participating in it. We've not been able to solve for that part of the problem yet. And at some level, there is also a risk that, this takes away from if this becomes the structure, it takes away from the innovation that needs to keep happening without the.
Because more and more people want to
back and pay for the proven models. So at some stage, I can also say that this will start taking away from the innovation that we still at any stage we always have to be innovating. Right. So it could take away from that as well.
Technology changes so fast, right? If you were to look into the crystal maze and think about 10 years from now, like what do you see? Like what would have happened to technology? What would have happened to the school systems? What are some things, what are some problems of the future that need to be solved?
The problems of the future may not be very different from the problems of today in terms of what the larger definition of the problem is. So the larger definition of the problem, if I were to define it for our target segment of children coming from poor families, is that we want to move out and break the circle of poverty for our children, and education is my biggest tool to be able to do that. So will this problem definition change? No. But will our methods to achieve that objective need to be different? Definitely, yes. So today, when we look at our target segment children, they look upon the knowledge economy of India as their aspiration. They want to move out of the circle of poverty and be sitting in the top companies of the world. And is our education system empowering them to be doing that? It is not. It's definitely not doing that, right? We are just talking about the basics today.
Right.
We're talking about our kids achieving grade level competencies in schools, which is the right first step given that our journey is that from poor to fair. But what will be our journey from fair to good will be the question for technology to answer. And that's the reason technology is needed, because our children will not wait for us to innovate both on the solution as well as on the implementation every 5 or 10 years. They, as the world changes, those solutions should be coming to them at the scale at which and wherever they are. So that's what technology has to solve. It has to change the pace of change. It has to change the scale of these solutions. It has to change very, very rapidly.
I'm sure you get a lot of this pushback from people saying, how will technology reach the last mile in India, where there may not be electricity, where teachers may not have exposure to technology, where internet is not available, where the cost of device is so high? What is your response to them?
So all of those are real problems, Pranav. I mean, they are the last mile is still an issue in India. and the teachers' adoption of technology is also poor. It's not something that they have grown up seeing, and it's not something that they naturally take up. But what gives me hope are two extreme examples. One is from our government work in Haryana, where we have almost moved to a system of sending training videos to teachers on WhatsApp, because it was becoming very difficult to pull out the teachers from the classrooms again and again for content training. And that has had huge adoption. Almost 80-90% teachers actually view these lectures, and through a monitoring system we are being able to also see that they're actually delivering that in the classroom. Fantastic. So that gives me a lot of hope. So the other extreme example is that of Avanti, which is an IIT JEE coaching program. So their teachers are expert teachers. They have a different problem. Their problem is that they would not want to accept anyone else's material for teaching, and they have a huge adoption of the training videos as well, because they see value in those. So looking at those two extreme examples, yes, last mile is a problem. Process adherence in general in India is an issue. So take up and adherence in teachers is also an issue in India. But these two examples give me hope that if you are creating value for the teacher, if you are saving her time and making her more effective, teachers are our smartest individuals, right? If they see it, then they will adopt it.
So Prachi, children are going either to the free government schools or the private schools when we talk about the K-12 education landscape, right? Which means ultimately either the government has to pay or a parent has to pay for some of these edtech solutions that we've been talking about. Otherwise, we will never be able to reach the scale that we are dreaming of, right? Philanthropy is only a bridge towards that. Do you think that they will ever pay? Do you think the governments or retail parents will ever pay for edtech solutions or other interventions?
You're very right, and you frame it beautifully, Pranav, that philanthropy is only a bridge to that stage when before government starts paying or the parents themselves start paying. Let's first talk about parents. It's easier. So if you come to think of our parents, especially those who are living very underprivileged lifestyles today. So are these parents paying? Yes, they are paying. They're paying as high as 20, 30, 40% of their earnings towards their children's education by sending them to private schools, by sending them to tuitions, irrespective of whether or not they are in government schools or private schools. So yes, the parents are paying. Are they paying for edtech? No, they're not paying for edtech. At least our experience doesn't show that they're paying for any form of education technology at scale in India today. But that's a segment I'm very hopeful of, right? Because they understand that they need better quality for their children. They've already opened their wallet to pay for better quality. And if edtech actually delivers on that promise and communicates that to the parents, that yes, I am able to give your child better education than what your school and tuition is being able to provide, they will pay. That's the question which I have no doubt about. Government is a trickier one, right? It's always a tricky one. Should they pay? Of course they should pay. Will they pay at some point of time? At some point of time, they will pay. When will that time be is hard to predict, but what needs to be done before they start paying, at least to us, is clear. We believe that when, again, these metrics become standardized and they become widely and adopted in the system and widely accepted in the system, that's a step one of the government to be able to pay. Come to think of it, right? I mean, we all blame the government for not paying for some of these services. It is so much harder to pay for edtech today versus paying for, say, painting your classroom, right? You wanted your class to be painted white, you ordered white paint, they brought white paint and they painted it up. And you can see at the end and you can cut a check for that. When you're using public funds to be able to do the same for education, it's not as black and white, and we are not collectively making an effort to make it black and white. So at least that step one has to happen. Whether or not it will happen even after the step 1 is accomplished, it is very hard to say, but I am very hopeful. The reason I'm very hopeful is that all the efforts that the government is making today is sort of prepping us for that. We are already talking about distributing laptops to our teachers or some form of hardware to our teachers. We are talking about personalized education. We are talking about learning outcomes. You and I know that these were not conversations that we are having even 5 or 6 years ago.
Right.
They are doing pilots. So both the government of Rajasthan, where you guys are working, EI is working very closely, is doing a large scale pilot on not just EI solutions with MindSpark, but so many other companies,
right,
with Avanti, with Convigenius, with English learning solutions. Government of Haryana is doing it, Andhra Pradesh is doing it. So there are many of these state governments which are actively engaging with technology, and they have adopted technology in many other areas. So it's a matter of time. I'm not thinking like even decades over here. I'm thinking it's few years, and what we have to do in those few years, we have to make those metrics much better understood, much widely accepted, much simpler for that eventual adoption to happen.
I like your analogy of the painting, right? So there's a bare wall, you ordered the white paint, you painted it, now you can see the wall is painted,
right,
and you're willing to pay for this.
Yeah.
In the edtech setup, one part of that can be solved just with the hardware, right? There was no tablet, you ordered a tablet, the child is holding a tablet and is now working on it. That part is visible, it's tangible, it's something they can touch. Hopefully parents and governments can see that and pay for that. I think the equivalent of whether the child is learning from that tablet or the laptop or the technology device, that's a more invisible sort of piece, right? So when you talk about these metrics, what would it be? What would be the equivalent of white paint, which is visible both in terms of benefits and in optics? What would that be for edtech, where it's not just about touching, a tablet, but it's about learning from that tablet?
It's about learning from that tablet, and while it might seem insufficient, measurement of grade level competencies and achievement of grade level competencies is part of that learning. It may not be the full learning. There might be other aspects that children have to learn, but that is one aspect of learning which we know is measurable.
To the ultimate payer, which is the parent or even the government in some cases, what is that language? What is the translated equivalent of the words that we use to be able to see that learning is happening?
Yes, and that's why what I have been saying throughout, Pranav, is the standardization of the metrics. And metrics is too heavy a term probably, but what do I have in mind with metrics, right? All our parents understand 60%, 70%. They all understand percentages, right? They all understand that above 65% is good, below a certain number is very bad, you fail. It is also a metric. We are just, what is going into, coming out with that number is not correct. Right. What we are measuring over there is incorrect. So, so in my mind, it's not it's not as if our parents don't understand. They of course understand. They have trusted a system to say that when they actually said 60%, 70%, they would have done the right thing. It's just that the right thing has not been done to get to that number. So that's why there is a shift needed in the dialogue on learning outcomes, on achievement of grade level competencies, but it's not at all different from what it should be, right? In our classrooms, that's what our teachers are being told, that your children, there is a national curricular framework. It is NCERT has done a great job in terms of converting that to learning outcomes that children have to achieve. Teachers are using both their tools as well as their strategies in order to achieve that common goal. Yes, we are some distance away from standards, learning standards, but that's the only way forward. That's the only way forward, and the communication of it has not yet been done, but definitely can be done, because our parents are already working on these kinds of metrics, right?
Yes. And I also feel, Prachi, that technology is not very expensive, given how we're used to operating in a shared economy today, right? So today most of us don't own cars, but we happily ride in an Uber or an Ola and get the feeling of driving in your own car with a driver. Right? In technology also, I feel like if you are able to think of not necessarily a one device per child, but having a device that is rotated among students, that allows for the one-to-one personalized usage of it, but a fractional ownership. Our estimates show that this is less than 250 rupees per child per year, or about $5 per child per year. Right? And then layering on a high quality software, given the software economies of scale, you can actually make it cheaper than a textbook, because the scale really helps. So all in all, at about 700 rupees per child per year, the cost for hardware, the cost for software, and the marginal cost of implementation and training being close to zero, because you plug into the existing line items, we're looking at somewhere around a 5% of the current spending per child towards an edtech solution. And so I'm actually quite hopeful that the myth that technology is expensive, or that technology cannot be used for learning, or that technology cannot be done by younger children in remote villages, I think those are very solvable problems as India continues to make economic progress, and that the electricity and internet reaches the last mile. But even today, at least half of our schools have access to the basics to implement edtech. So I think the real game changer for me, I think, is when the benefits of edtech are so visible to an average parent citizen, to see that yes, my child is now able to read a newspaper or do the market transactions sensibly. I think that would be like the equivalent of us taking edtech to scale.
Yes, definitely, Pranav. I think cost is the other big scale factor which has to come in. It's the only factor which can get you to scale. And like you very well said, that metrics is, and achievement of them is one part of it, but the other part is the cost has to make sense. If I, in a country like India, if I'm able to get a 200 rupees tuition for my child, and that makes my child ace his or her exams, does it make sense for me to invest in an 8,000 rupees tablet on which I have to renew at 2,000 rupees per year, or so on and so forth? Many parents will really think about it. And I think that's something for our education entrepreneurs to keep in mind as well. It is not just about hardware, it is about software as well, right? I mean, how will you ride on the existing gigantic software infrastructure also that exists, right? Does every company need to reinvent Google search as a search for education? Do we need to create a new communication platform when WhatsApp has literally penetrated to the last mile to every single individual in India? So if our education entrepreneurs are not going to keep that in mind, that how do I leapfrog by leveraging what exists in the system, we will never be able to leapfrog, right? Then you're becoming another Google, and it take Google a few decades to get where we got. And I have seen that happen. I have seen that happen in Haryana and in Himachal, where if we would have hired a software company to say, okay, please create an architect communication channel for us so that we can reach every, I would be still waiting, but we are not, because we just said, okay, one thing we know, that WhatsApp is there on all teachers' phones. Let's create very good quality videos. Let's create on top of it a monitoring mechanism to make sure that they actually saw that video and are using that video. And on day 7 we were in the classrooms, right? Amazing. Versus on day 7 we would still be floating tenders and selecting, not even 10, we would have been writing our scope of work and iterating through that. So we have to leverage what is there. We have to leverage our existing software, applications, internet, whatever it is. You can't start everything from scratch. We don't have the time to start again from scratch, and there is no need to start again.
There's a new edtech startup that's emerging on the Indian education scene every day. If I were to come to you as a new entrepreneur in education, what would be your advice to me, given that you have dealt with so many of them through multiple highs and lows over your career?
One advice that I would give to education entrepreneurs is that education is no different from any other sector in delivering on your customer promise. And somehow when we become education entrepreneurs, and there's so many stakeholders in education, we forget that. You don't even know who your end beneficiary is, which is the student, creating value for the student. And whatever value it may be, it might be the promise of getting you into a good college, it might be the promise of getting you good scores, it might be the promise of even saying that we will be able to coach you in that journey of getting into a good college. So it could be any promise. But you have to know what your promise is and you have to deliver on that promise. And this is this is a very generic statement, Pranav, but it's so well understood in the venture world, right? What is your customer promise? Right. What is the value that you're creating for your customer? And make sure you're delivering that value. Somehow in education, just this basic understanding is sometimes missing in our education entrepreneurs. And I think we have to start from there as we start thinking of our ventures.
I don't know what it is. Do I talk about children learning? Do I talk about their parents being happy to pay them? Do I talk about the school's 10% marks increasing? I mean, what should I be delivering on and who should I be delivering to? Who does this value accrue to?
So that I didn't say it's easy. I didn't say it's easy. It's really hard. And that's the reason we do not have any large edtech company which is success in that sense today, because there are many stakeholders. The stakeholders who are purchasing are different from the stakeholders who are using, which is sort of probably peculiar to our sector and does not happen in many other sectors. Except for very few sub-segments of education, in many other segments, you cannot even say that whether or not you've created that value or generated that value, right? Test prep is one which stands out for me because the promise is very clear. I'll get you, there's an exam, I'll get you to clear that exam, and you clear it or you don't clear it. In others, it's harder to even say whether you've been able to create that value for the student or not.
It's great to be partners in this journey together for such a long time, Sam. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming
Pranav.
and speaking to us.
Thank you so much.